Welcome to Shatter.
Help me reach 5,000 subscribers. Support the video with a like and leave your thoughts in the comments. Last Friday night, I walked into Michael's house with a box of folding chairs under my arm and a strange chill already crawling down my spine. It wasn't the music or the smell of barbecue drifting in from the backyard. It was the silence behind the bathroom door, the kind that carries whispers you're not supposed to hear. I stopped. The door was cracked, just enough for voices to slip through. Her voice, Rebecca's, my girlfriend of 2 years. Distinct, sharp, laced with excitement. So I'll stand in the middle, and you guys spread around. Make sure someone's recording when I say it. I want to catch his face when it hits him. I froze. Jessica's voice chimed in next, high-pitched with glee. Oh my God, this is going to be epic. You're actually doing it? Then Mia, laughing. Of course she is. Guys always fold when it's public. He'll be begging on his knees before the night's over. You'll have proof of how much he loves you. The words hit like a fist to the gut. My chest tightened, but my body didn't move. What if he doesn't fight back? Another voice asked, Amanda's. Calm, calculating. Rebecca laughed then, a laugh I thought I loved, now jagged like broken glass. He will. He always does. His ego won't let him walk away. Besides, Ryan's obsessed with me. This is going to be perfect. My hands went numb around the chairs. They weren't planning a breakup. They were planning a performance. My humiliation, set on stage in front of our friends, filmed for social media, packaged as entertainment. For a moment, my instincts screamed to kick that door open, to call her out right there, to watch her choke on her smug little plan. But something colder took over. A thought that felt sharper than any outburst ever could. If she wanted to put on a show, I'd let her. But she wasn't going to be the only one writing the script. I walked back into the kitchen, set the chairs down, and smiled at Michael as if I hadn't just overheard my girlfriend plotting to destroy me for views and laughter. He glanced at me, noticed the silence in my eyes, but didn't ask. Good. There was no need. By 9 o'clock, the house was packed. Music pulsed, drinks flowed, and laughter filled every corner. Rebecca was radiant, standing in the middle of the living room like she owned the stage, her friends scattered strategically around her, phones ready. Jessica already had hers angled discreetly. Amanda whispered something, and Mia's grin was feral. Rebecca took a breath, dramatic, rehearsed. Ryan, we need to talk, she said loud enough for half the party to hear. Every head turned. Conversations died. Even the music seemed to dim. I looked at her calmly, beer in hand, heartbeat steady. What's on your mind? She delivered her line, word for word, as I'd heard her rehearse. I don't think this is working anymore. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Her friends leaned forward, phones recording, hungry for tears, begging, desperation. I gave her none of it. You're right, I said simply. Thank you for being honest. And just like that, I set my drink down, pulled out my keys, and began walking toward the door. Her face cracked. Her friends blinked. The room fell into stunned silence. And as I stepped out into the night air, I knew the performance wasn't over. It had just begun. The night air outside Michael's house was sharp, clean, and filled with the muffled bass of the party I had just left behind. I didn't hurry. I didn't slam the door. I walked slowly across the lawn, letting silence wrap itself around me. Inside, Rebecca was probably frozen in place, wondering why her grand performance had collapsed before the first act was even complete. But I wasn't thinking about her panic. I was thinking about how much power she had just handed me by assuming I would play my role. I reached my car, unlocked it, and leaned against the door without getting in. I could almost hear the confusion spreading inside the house. The murmurs, the shifting eyes, the slow realization among the crowd that something had gone terribly wrong with the script they were expecting. I imagined Rebecca turning to her friends, desperate for cues that weren't coming. They had bet on me being weak, emotional, predictable. Instead, I had given them nothing. No begging, no pleading, no fight. Just silence and departure. I stayed there for 10 minutes, not because I was waiting for anyone, but because I wanted the picture burned into memory, Ryan walking away without hesitation. When I finally drove off, I didn't look back. That night, I didn't sleep. Not because I was hurting, but because clarity had a way of keeping me wide awake. I wasn't going to shout or send long texts demanding explanations. I wasn't going to argue my worth with a woman who thought my dignity was disposable content for her Instagram. No, My plan would be colder, sharper, irreversible. The next morning, I changed every shared password we had. Streaming services, food delivery accounts, even the joint subscription she used for her design apps. I removed her from the shared bank card and redirected every bill back into my name alone. By noon, Rebecca no longer had access to a single financial resource I controlled. By evening, I had boxed up the few things she had left at my place: her makeup bag, a pair of shoes, 2 hoodies she liked stealing, and left them neatly on the porch with a note: "Your independence, delivered." I didn't answer her calls that weekend. They came in waves. First soft, testing, then sharp, demanding. Sunday night, Michael texted me. "Man, she lost it after you left." Tried to laugh it off, but people saw through it. She looked humiliated. I didn't reply. Silence was louder than anything I could have said. By Monday morning, she showed up at my office. Perfectly dressed, eyes wide, a rehearsed mix of anger and desperation. She demanded I explain myself, as if I owed her that. I looked at her once, then walked past her without a word. That was the moment she realized something she hadn't prepared for. She had tried to test me in public, but I wasn't playing games anymore. I was already writing a different ending, one she couldn't control. Rebecca standing in the lobby of my office building was almost theatrical in itself. Perfect hair, flawless makeup, a fitted blazer over her dress like she was auditioning for the role of wronged girlfriend. She called my name as if the weight of it would make me stop. It didn't. I walked straight past her, through the revolving doors, and into the city morning without a single word. My silence hit harder than any argument. I knew her well enough to picture the cracks forming in her confidence the moment I kept walking. She had counted on drama, on me falling apart, on an emotional chase scene. Instead, she was left holding a script with no co-star. That was the first time I saw her mask slip. Not because I stayed to watch, but because later that afternoon, Michael sent me a text. "She's asking people why you're ghosting her. She doesn't get it. She looks scared." And that was the point. Fear, not of me, but of irrelevance. The worst punishment for someone like Rebecca wasn't anger, it was indifference. By midweek, the fallout had already begun. I heard from a mutual friend that she had started spinning a story, telling anyone who would listen that I was punishing her, that I had overreacted, that she had just been testing our love. But stories collapse when too many people witnessed the truth. They saw the phones, the stage positions, the rehearsed drama. They saw me walk away with my dignity intact. At home, I didn't waste time replaying conversations or scrolling through old photos. I erased them. Every picture, every saved chat, every reminder of her. Gone. Not out of bitterness, but because I had no use for relics of someone who chose betrayal disguised as entertainment. My apartment felt different immediately. Lighter. Like I had finally removed a weight I didn't even realize I had been carrying. That Friday, almost exactly a week after the party, Rebecca showed up at my place. She didn't knock softly. She pounded on the door, her voice high and panicked. When I opened it, she tried to walk inside as if she still had the right. I blocked her with one step. She demanded to talk. I looked at her calmly, said nothing, and shut the door. Her fists hit the wood once, twice, then silence. Inside, I sat back down on the couch, phone in hand, and felt something I hadn't felt in months. Control. Not over her. Over myself. The kind of control that can't be manipulated or staged. She had tried to create a public spectacle to prove my love. Instead, she had exposed her own emptiness. And I was only beginning to show her what silence could really do. By the second week, Rebecca's desperation had turned into strategy. She wasn't just showing up unannounced anymore. She was trying to recruit people to her side. I started getting messages from mutual friends, carefully worded questions that all sounded the same. "Hey man, are you doing okay? Rebecca says you're shutting her out." I answered none of them. Silence wasn't just my response, it was my shield. But silence has a way of creating echoes, and soon enough those echoes reached her. Michael called me one night, his voice low, cautious. He said Rebecca had broken down at a small gathering, claiming I had abandoned her for no reason, painting herself as the victim. He told me people weren't buying it. They had seen enough at the party to know she was rewriting history. That was when it clicked for me. She wasn't just fighting for me anymore. She was fighting for her reputation. The next morning, I acted. I pulled every joint financial tie that still existed between us. The last shared account closed, her name removed from every utility she never once paid herself. By noon, she was fully cut off. That evening, I packed the last of her belongings into 2 boxes and left them in the lobby of her apartment building with a short note. Complete independence. As you wanted. I didn't stay to see her find them, but I imagined the look on her face. Not angry. Not sad. Hollow. Because when you strip away the stage lights, the audience, and the performance, you're left with reality. And reality was the one place she couldn't control the script. That weekend, I got a call I didn't expect, from her sister. She told me Rebecca had been ranting about how I was being cruel, how I had blindsided her. Then her voice shifted. She said quietly, "She didn't tell us what really happened at Michael's party. I heard the whole story from someone else. She embarrassed herself. Not you." For the first time, I realized even her family was seeing through the cracks. I hung up the phone and felt nothing but certainty. The woman who once believed I would orbit her forever was now spinning out alone, trying to pull others into her gravity. But the truth was spreading faster than her excuses. On Sunday night, she tried one last move. She posted a long caption on Instagram, full of vague quotes about betrayal and cold hearts. It was supposed to sting. Instead, it backfired. I watched mutual friends comment things like, "Is this about the stunt you pulled at Michael's?" Rebecca had wanted to control the narrative. But now, she wasn't the director anymore. She was just another actor caught in a script she couldn't rewrite. And I was already halfway out of the theater. By the 3rd week, her silence had finally cracked. Rebecca wasn't posting vague quotes anymore. She was calling. First once, then twice. Then so often my phone lit up like an alarm clock I never set. I didn't answer a single time. Each missed call was another reminder to her that she no longer had access to me. When the calls stopped, the texts began. They came in waves, switching tones like she was rehearsing different scripts. The first messages were apologetic. "I just wanted to talk. I know I messed up." Then defensive. "You're being dramatic. It wasn't that serious." And finally, desperate. "Please, just one chance to explain. I'll do anything." I read every word, but I never replied. Silence was heavier than anger. Anger gives hope. Silence doesn't. The funny part was watching how fast people around us picked sides. At first, they didn't know what to believe. But the more she tried to push her version, the more obvious it became that she wasn't telling the whole truth. A friend of mine, Daniel, told me she had tried to convince him that the breakup stunt was just a harmless joke. Daniel laughed when he told me, "She doesn't get it, man. No one's laughing with her anymore." That was the shift. For years, Rebecca had thrived on being the center of attention, the one everyone watched, the one who could spin any story her way. But now, she wasn't the main character. She was the cautionary tale. I didn't gloat. I didn't celebrate. I just kept moving forward. I hit the gym harder, stayed later at work, and spent evenings rebuilding pieces of myself I had ignored while orbiting her chaos. For the first time in a long time, my life was mine again. And she noticed. Because the texts changed again. No more apologies or accusations. They became attempts at nostalgia. Old photos of us together, captions like, "Remember this?" or "We were so good once." I deleted them instantly. If I let even one stay, it would have been like leaving the door cracked open. Then came the night she showed up at my apartment again. This time, she wasn't angry or dramatic. She looked smaller, fragile in a way I had never seen. She stood there in the hallway, clutching her phone like a lifeline, and whispered through the door that she couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, couldn't think. I listened. Then I walked away, left her voice muffled behind the wood. That night I realized something. She had staged a performance to test my love. But now the roles were reversed. She was the one performing, begging for an audience. And I was the one who no longer needed to watch. By the 4th week, Rebecca's desperation had turned into chaos. She wasn't just trying to reach me anymore. She was trying to reach anyone who might still believe her story. I started hearing from people I hadn't spoken to in years. Old acquaintances, mutual friends, even her coworkers. They all carried the same tone, that cautious curiosity, like they wanted to confirm if the rumors were true. One night, Michael called again. His voice was low, almost guilty. He said Rebecca had been showing up at his place uninvited, demanding that he convince me to talk to her. She had even cried in front of his girlfriend, pleading for someone, anyone, to explain why I was being so cold. Michael's girlfriend told her bluntly, "Because you tried to humiliate him for fun." Rebecca had no response. That was when I realized her problem wasn't just losing me. It was losing control of the story. She had always been the one pulling the strings, shaping the narrative, deciding how people saw her. Now, she wasn't the author anymore. She was the villain in everyone else's version. I didn't waste time worrying about it. Instead, I focused on myself. I picked up old hobbies I had dropped during the relationship. I reconnected with people who remembered me before Rebecca, people who didn't know me as her boyfriend, but as myself. Every step away from her was another reminder of how small my world had become while she filled it with games and manipulation. Of course, she noticed. Her texts shifted again. This time they weren't nostalgic, they were competitive. Pictures of her at bars, surrounded by friends, smiling like she wanted me to believe she had moved on. But the timing gave her away. She only posted when I ignored her for too long, when my silence grew too heavy. It wasn't happiness. It was bait. And I wasn't biting. The real turning point came when her sister called me again. She admitted Rebecca had broken down during a family dinner, crying so hard she could barely speak. The story spilled out, messy and incomplete, but enough for everyone at the table to understand. Her parents, once her biggest defenders, were silent. Her sister told me later, "They're embarrassed. Not for you. For her." That was when it hit me. Rebecca hadn't just lost me. She had lost the stage. The lights, the audience, the applause gone. All that was left was silence. And in that silence, she was forced to face something she had never prepared for. The consequences of being the one who turned love into a performance. By the 5th week, Rebecca's desperation was no longer private. It had spilled into the open, and she couldn't contain it. People who once looked at her with admiration were now watching her unravel. The same friends who used to amplify her drama had gone quiet, almost embarrassed to be connected to her. I knew because Daniel mentioned it one night over drinks. He said Jessica and Mia, the ones who filmed the party, were distancing themselves, claiming they had no idea it would go that far. Convenient, but predictable. Nobody wants to be left holding the wreckage when the spotlight turns harsh. Meanwhile, Rebecca's messages grew darker. They weren't apologies anymore, not even nostalgia. They were bargaining attempts. Promises to cut ties with her toxic friends, to delete her social media, to change. She said she had signed up for therapy, that she was working on herself. The irony was sharp. She wanted me to applaud her for finally doing the bare minimum of what it takes to be an adult partner. But I didn't respond. Not once. Silence is heavy. It creates space that people try to fill with excuses, with noise, with desperate attempts to be seen. But no matter how many words she threw at me, they fell into the void. And the more she spoke, the clearer it became. She wasn't sorry she had tried to humiliate me. She was sorry she failed. One night, around midnight, I heard banging at my door again. Not polite knocking, pounding, frantic. I stayed still, listening as her voice cracked on the other side. She begged, pleaded, whispered things like, "I can't do this without you. And please, just 5 minutes." I sat there in silence until her voice broke into sobs. Then the hallway went quiet. Eventually, the sound of her heels faded down the stairs. When I finally looked through the peephole, all I saw was an envelope on the floor. Inside was a letter, pages long, scrawled with her handwriting. Every line was a mixture of blame and regret. She admitted the plan, admitted the pressure from her friends, admitted she wanted to see if I still loved her enough to fight. But the words that stood out most were at the end. "I never thought you'd actually leave." That was her truth. She never believed I could walk away. She thought I'd be her safety net forever, catching her every time she tried to test gravity. But that night, holding her letter, I realized she wasn't the one falling anymore. She was already at the bottom, and I wasn't climbing down to meet her. By the 6th week, her downfall was no longer just about me. It had spread into every corner of her life. Her carefully curated social image cracked wide open, and people began treating her differently. I didn't have to dig for details. They came to me. A coworker of hers, someone I barely knew, pulled me aside at a coffee shop. He said, "Man, she's not the same at work. Distracted, nervous. People talk." That was the confirmation I didn't even need. My silence wasn't just eating away at her. It was reshaping how the world saw her. I kept moving forward, quietly building the life she thought I'd never reclaim. I started training again, the kind of workouts I used to skip when I was bending my schedule around her. My evenings weren't about waiting for her texts anymore, they were mine. I booked a short trip for myself, 2 days by the coast, something I hadn't done in years. No announcements, no explanations. Just living. And the more I lived, the smaller she became in my memory. But Rebecca wasn't letting go. Her messages turned into confessions. She wrote about how lonely she felt, how she regretted listening to her friends, how she couldn't believe she'd risked everything for a stunt. One line stood out. "I didn't think you were capable of shutting me out like this." She was right. She had built her entire plan on the assumption that I would crumble, that I would beg. She never imagined silence could be sharper than anger. The silence worked so well that even her allies betrayed her. Jessica, the one who recorded the party, slipped up at another gathering and admitted what really happened. Michael told me later how people reacted. Disgust, disbelief, laughter, but not the kind Rebecca wanted. The performance she designed for social media had become a punchline in real life. That weekend, she showed up one last time. Not with anger, not with rehearsed speeches, but with nothing left in her eyes. She looked hollow, her voice stripped of pride. She said, "Please, I'll do anything. Just tell me what you want." I studied her for a long moment, then stepped aside, not to let her in, but to close the door. The click of that lock echoed louder than her words. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't punishment. It was finality. She had tested me in front of everyone to prove her power. But in the end, it was my silence, my refusal to play her game, that left her powerless. And now, for the first time, she had to live in the void she created. 2 months had passed since the night at Michael's house, and by then Rebecca was only a ghost in the background of my life. She still tried. Messages that dwindled from paragraphs to single words, calls that came less often but always at night when the silence was hardest for her. I didn't answer. I had nothing left to say. My world was already moving on without her. The shift was obvious everywhere. Friends who once introduced me as Rebecca's boyfriend now invited me places as just Ryan again. I wasn't an accessory to her social circle anymore. I was my own person. At work, I had more energy than I'd felt in years. I started leading projects, even got noticed by upper management. My focus was sharp, unclouded by the constant noise of someone else's manipulations. And then came the proof that she had finally broken. A mutual acquaintance sent me a screenshot late one evening. It was Rebecca's new post, a long caption under a picture of her alone at a cafe. She wrote about being betrayed by silence, about how some men punish women instead of forgiving them. But the comments told a different story. People weren't buying it anymore. Some called her out directly, reminding her of the stunt she tried to pull at the party. Others simply left one-word replies. Karma. I didn't comment, didn't share, didn't respond. But I read every word. Not out of spite, but as a reminder that I had made the right choice. She had destroyed her own credibility, and now she was trying to claw it back with pity. The truth was, she wasn't the same person anymore, and neither was I. I had no anger left, no bitterness, no urge to strike back. All I felt was distance. Cold, necessary distance. She had tested me in front of everyone to prove I loved her. What she ended up proving was that I valued myself too much to stay. One night, as I sat on my balcony with a glass of whiskey, I scrolled through old photos one last time. Us on vacations, birthdays, quiet nights that once felt real. I deleted them all, not with sadness, but with a calm finality. She was no longer part of my story. And as the city lights stretched out in front of me, I realized the final truth. Rebecca had wanted a spectacle, but in the end, the silence I gave her was the only ending she couldn't rewrite. And that silence was forever. 3 months after that night, the storm was gone from my life. Rebecca had finally stopped calling, stopped writing, stopped showing up. Her silence wasn't peace, it was surrender. I didn't chase it, didn't question it. I simply lived. And the life I built in that quiet was something I hadn't felt in years, mine. I heard pieces of her story from time to time, mostly through friends who still ran into her. She had cut ties with Jessica and Mia completely, blaming them for pushing her into the stunt. Amanda, too, had disappeared from her circle. She stood alone now, carrying the weight of choices she thought would make her powerful. But no one bought the excuses anymore. The party had exposed her, and there was no way back from that. Meanwhile, I had changed. Not in small ways, not in surface-level habits. I had rebuilt everything. I traveled, reconnected with old friends, and poured energy into things I had abandoned. I wasn't surviving, I was thriving. My reflection in the mirror wasn't someone broken by betrayal. It was someone sharper, colder, untouchable. The final message from her came in the form of an email. Long, emotional, filled with apologies and promises. She wrote that she had learned her lesson, that she was in therapy, that she wanted to prove she could be the woman I deserved. She begged for one chance. I didn't reply. I didn't even finish reading. I deleted it without hesitation, and with that single click, I closed the last open door she had to me. Because the truth was simple. I no longer needed closure. I no longer needed answers. The test she staged was supposed to measure my love for her, but instead it revealed something far more important: my love for myself. I walked away without shouting, without pleading, without playing the role she wanted. And in doing so, I proved something she never believed possible. I wasn't a man who could be tested. I was a man who knew his worth. The night she tried to humiliate me in front of everyone, she thought she was in control. But her performance ended the moment I refused to act my part. That silence, that calm refusal, was louder than any fight. It ended her script, her power, her game. And now, as I look back, the final line writes itself. She wanted a show, but I gave her silence. And in that silence, she lost me forever. Support the channel by liking, commenting, and subscribing. I promise even more interesting stories.